The morning she discovered the truth, the world did not shatter. It did not darken or tremble or tilt on its axis the way novels always promised. Instead, it continued with cruel normalcy. The sun rose. Birds argued in the neem tree outside her window. Somewhere in the hostel corridor, a girl laughed too loudly at something on her phone. Life went on, unaware that hers had quietly split into a before and an after. Anaya sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the thin blanket pooled in her lap, her hands trembling around a small plastic stick that felt far heavier than it should have. 2 lines. Clear. Certain. Unmistakable. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, as if speaking it softly might make it less real. Her first thought was not fear. It was not shame. It was his face, Professor Arman Khan. She closed her eyes, and memory rushed in. The lecture hall washed in afternoon light, the quiet authority in his voice, the way he never raised it yet commanded attention from even the most restless students. He had been different from the beginning. Not distant, not indulgent, simply kind in a way that felt deliberate, thoughtful, almost old-fashioned. Their connection had not begun with stolen glances or reckless impulses. It had started with a question after class about a research topic, then another, then long conversations in the library about books neither of them were required to read. He treated her not as a child or a student to be dismissed, but as someone worth listening to. When he laughed, it was soft and surprised, as if he didn't do it often enough. She hadn't meant to fall in love. She wasn't even sure when it had happened. One day, she was simply a diligent student who admired her professor. The next, she was counting the days until his lectures, memorizing the cadence of his speech, noticing the way fatigue softened his eyes at the end of a long day. And then, one rainy evening, everything had changed. The campus had emptied early due to the storm. She had stayed late in the library, unaware that hours had slipped by. When she finally stepped outside, the rain was relentless, drenching the pathways, turning the world into a blur of silver. Her phone was dead. The buses had stopped running. She had stood there helplessly until headlights cut through the rain. "Anaya!" His voice, surprised and concerned, had felt like a lifeline. He offered her a ride home. She hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because she trusted him too much. Yet the storm left little choice. The car smelled faintly of old books and sandalwood. They spoke at first about safe topics, coursework, exams, the weather. But as the rain drummed against the roof, something shifted. Silence became comfortable. Confessions slipped out. Her fears about the future, his quiet loneliness after losing his parents years earlier, the pressure he carried as the eldest in his family. By the time they reached her building, neither of them wanted the moment to end. That night did not feel reckless. It felt inevitable, as if 2 lonely hearts had finally stopped pretending they were fine on their own. There had been no rush, no confusion, only tenderness, caution, and a depth of emotion that frightened them both. Afterward, he had sat beside her on the small sofa, his hand wrapped around hers, his voice low and certain. "This changes everything," he said. She had nodded, heart pounding. "In a bad way." "In a serious way," he replied. "Which means we have to be brave." They agreed to keep their relationship private until she graduated. Not out of shame, but to protect her future, her reputation, her academic standing, her dreams. He insisted on that. He insisted on everything that would keep her safe. And now this. 2 lines. Her breath hitched. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Anaya, is everything all right?" His voice was calm, but she heard the immediate concern beneath it. He always sensed when something was wrong. I need to see you," she said, her throat tight. "Today." A pause. "I'll cancel my classes." "No," she said quickly. "After. Please." "Where?" "The park near the old library." "I'll be there." He didn't ask why. He didn't press. That was so very him. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the pale gold of approaching evening. The park was quiet, students scattered on benches, children chasing pigeons near the fountain. Anaya sat on a weathered bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw him approaching, her chest ached. He looked the same as always. Neatly pressed shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal his watch, his posture straight but unpretentious. Yet his eyes searched her face immediately, reading the tension there. He didn't sit right away. What happened? She couldn't speak. Instead, she pulled the test from her bag and handed it to him. For a moment, he simply stared. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then he sat down beside her, very slowly, as if the ground might give way. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "This morning." Silence stretched between them. She braced herself for panic, for anger, for the crushing weight of regret. Instead, he covered his face with one hand and exhaled. Not sharply, not in distress, but in something like awe. When he looked at her again, his eyes were bright. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question broke her. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I don't want to ruin your life. Or mine. Or—" Anaya. His voice was firm, gentle, unmistakably steady. He took her hands, grounding her. "You are not ruining anything. But the university, your job, people will say. People always say things," he replied softly. "What matters is what we say. What we choose." She searched his face, terrified of hope. "What are you choosing?" He held her gaze, unwavering. "You," he said. "And our child." Her breath caught. "I'm not running," he continued. "I'm not hiding. If anything, I regret that we waited so long to acknowledge what this is." "What is it?" she whispered. "Family," he said simply. Then, after a heartbeat, "Marry me." The words landed gently, not as a dramatic declaration, but as a promise already formed in his heart. She stared at him. "You're serious?" "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." "But this is sudden." "Loving you wasn't sudden," he said. "This is just the moment we stop pretending we can live without each other." Her heart felt too big for her chest. "You don't have to answer now," he added. "But I want you to know this. You will not face this alone. Not today. Not ever." Something inside her, a knot of fear she hadn't even realized she carried, loosened. "What if it ruins your career?" she asked quietly. He smiled, small and peaceful. "Then I'll find another one. Careers can be rebuilt. Regret is much harder to live with. And if people judge you, they will," he said calmly. "But they don't get to decide my happiness." Tears blurred her vision again, but this time they were warm, not cold. "Yes," she whispered. He blinked. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." For the first time since she had known him, Professor Armand Khan looked utterly, boyishly relieved. He let out a shaky laugh, then pulled her into a careful embrace, as if she were something precious and fragile. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair, "for trusting me." The wedding took place, quietly 2 weeks later. No grand hall, no elaborate decorations, just a small ceremony in a sunlit courtyard, a few close friends, his younger sister, and the soft scent of jasmine drifting through the air. Anaya wore a simple ivory outfit, her hands trembling as she signed the marriage certificate. When she looked up, he was watching her with such tenderness that her fear dissolved completely. After the ceremony, as they stepped outside into the warm afternoon, he leaned close and said, "Mrs. Khan." She laughed through her tears. "That sounds strange." "It sounds perfect," he replied. Life did not become magically easy after that. There were whispers at the university, difficult conversations, bureaucratic complications. He resigned from his teaching position to avoid scandal, choosing dignity over defense. They moved into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. It was small, but it was theirs, a space filled with mismatched furniture, stacks of books, and the quiet comfort of shared mornings. He found work as a researcher for a publishing firm. The hours were long, the pay modest, but he never complained. Each evening, he returned home with the same gentle smile, asking about her day, cooking when she was too tired, reading aloud to the baby growing inside her as if their child could already understand every word. One night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Anaya watched him assemble a tiny wooden crib in the corner of their bedroom. "You didn't have to do all this yourself," she said. He glanced up, screwdriver in hand. "I wanted to." "Why?" He paused, considering the question seriously. "Because every piece I build feels like proof," he said. "Proof that this is real. That we're really doing this. That I get to be part of your life." Emotion swelled in her chest. "You make it sound like a gift." "It is," he said simply. Months later, As dawn painted the hospital room in pale gold, Anaya lay exhausted but overwhelmed with wonder. In her arms rested a tiny, sleeping girl, her face impossibly small, her fingers curled like petals. Armand stood beside the bed, eyes shining, utterly speechless. "Do you want to hold her?" Anaya asked softly. He hesitated, almost afraid. "What if I drop her?" "You won't." Carefully, reverently, he took the baby into his arms. The moment she settled against his chest, something transformed in his expression, all giving way to fierce, quiet devotion. "Hello," he whispered to the tiny bundle. "I'm your father." The baby stirred, making a soft sound, as if acknowledging him. Tears slipped down his face unchecked. Anaya watched, her heart so full it ached. "You were right," she said gently. He looked at her. "About what?" This didn't ruin anything. He shook his head, voice thick with emotion. "It saved me." Outside, the sun rose fully, flooding the room with light. Not the harsh brightness of exposure, but the warm glow of a new beginning. And in that small hospital room, surrounded by quiet hope, a story that had begun with fear became one of courage, love, and the simple, extraordinary promise of staying together, always.